We made this.
Hello all and welcome to Pick a Disc, the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to and then we talk about it. My name's Matt Latham and today I'm welcoming back on Meg from the podcast formerly known as Gina Birrett to talk about the American Wedding soundtrack. Today we talk quite a bit about the songs and about kind of relationship to them and a bit about the kind of like the backstory of how Meg listened to the album and basically being too young to watch the film. Interesting to listen to. So do stick around. If you are listening to this, please don't press stop. Just carry on listening. I'm sure you'll enjoy the conversation that's about to unfold. And if you did enjoy the conversation that unfolded, don't forget to follow us on all the socials, like for example, Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. You just search for Pick a Disc and we're on there. And don't forget, there is a link to the Discord server, the Pick a Discord, which I quite like the name of. So you can click on that and say hello and tell us what you've been listening to and pretend you like the podcast, And, if there's places that review it, again, commit opinion fraud, lie and tell us that we're 5-star worthy so other people can lie and commit opinion fraud and also say we're 5-star worthy. I just want more people to basically game the system. That's what I want, really. Yeah. It's not about liking the podcast. It's about gaming the system. So, yeah. And, with that, let's talk to Meg. So yeah, I think you've got the second most downloaded episode of the podcast in the Love Actually episode.
I love that so much. It's an honor.
Going to point now, it's going to end up being like an annual thing. I'm pretty sure it's sending you a screenshot of suddenly like the sudden upburst in listens throughout Christmas.
I mean, it's a great tradition. I also love how with that and then with the episode that we're about to do, I'm kind of establishing, I've hired myself as your like in-house soundtrack specialist. So.
So this is the second soundtrack that you've been on. I think I've covered possibly 5, potentially 6. I think it's 6. There's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Pretty Woman. Pretty Woman is still the most downloaded episode it's got at least 5 times more than the Love Actually one. It's ridiculous how much. Yeah. I still think it's people wanting to listen to the soundtrack and they just end up getting my voice instead. And there's the Love Actually, not a movie soundtrack, but Jeff Wayne doesn't count. There's the Josie and the Pussycats, and then this one, and I think there's another one. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm gonna, that's gonna bug me now. I should have really checked this before I started. But yeah, I think it's Josie and the Pussycats, the Yellow Jackets season 1, and the South Park movie.
Those are both good.
Yeah, so elements of things kicking in. But so we're going to be talking about another soundtrack that you've picked today, from the same year as Love Actually, come to think of it. Yeah. 2003. So, Meg, why don't you tell the lovely listeners the disc that you've picked for us today?
So the soundtrack that I have chosen is, in America, the film is called American Wedding. It is the third film in the original American Pie, not like the American Pie Presents ones. But I think in the UK, it's usually called American Pie: The Wedding. But yeah, it is the soundtrack to the American Wedding film, which was released in 2003, same year as Love Actually, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Why have you picked this? So why did you pick this soundtrack?
So it is far and away my favorite film soundtrack of all time. Love Actually definitely nails it for like a mix of, Christmas and cheesy early naughty songs. But we listened to this soundtrack as a kid growing up constantly, which is actually quite funny because I was not allowed to watch this film until I was well into my teen years. For those of you who aren't familiar with the American Pie films, they're quite raunchy and filthy. So definitely, I was 9 years old when this film came out, and I certainly was not watching the film at that age. But my parents bought the soundtrack, and we just listened to it constantly. And it's just absolutely full of kind of like pop alternative rock hits of the early 2000s, and some nice kind of slow tracks as well. And yeah, it's just definitely my favorite.
So, how did you come to listen to the soundtrack then? If you I'm assuming you was aware of the films but weren't allowed to see them, or was it just the songs, or?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I don't think it was American Wedding. I think it was the second American Pie film. Back when I was a kid, in the summer, my family used to go to the drive-in, which I know in the UK is not really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have probably just seen it in Greece or whatever. And it's not, to be honest, it's not really a thing in the US anymore. Most of them have closed, but when I was a kid, we used to go to the drive-in, and the drive-in historically was always a double feature. So they would usually do a like family oriented film as the first film that would start at like 8 o'clock in the evening. And then for the second film, they would do more of a grown-ups film and just kind of assume that, either people with kids would leave or their kids would fall asleep or whatever. So the second American Pie film, we went to see at the drive-in. I think the film we saw before that is like the children's film was like one of the Shrek movies or something. I can't remember. It was definitely like a cartoon. And then my parents just said, okay, kids, me and my little sister at the time, they're like, okay, just go sleep in the back. We brought like sleeping bags, and they just expected that we would crash in the back. But I definitely like sat and kind of watched a bit of American Pie. Even though I really, really wasn't supposed to. And yeah, I remember as a kid even being like, oh my gosh, this film, like I kind of knew like I should not be watching this. But anyway, yeah. So I kind of was like familiar with the films. And then my parents just really, really enjoyed them. They bought all the films on DVD. And yeah, I think at some point my dad must have just gone and bought the soundtrack. And we were just the sort of family where we would buy a CD at, Best Buy or something, and it would just kind of be in the car for, that would become like the only thing we listened to for ages, and then we'd replace it with something else. So yeah, it was just definitely one of like the car CDs that we listened to a ridiculous amount.
When did you eventually see American Wedding?
I was probably like 14 or 15. So yeah, in high school at some point. And then I loved it. To be honest, as a little side tidbit, the American Pie films, in my opinion, are in a very small category of films that I think like all of the sequels are really good and worth watching. And I think one of the reasons for that is because they retain most of the original cast in all of the films. So just as like a random plug, if anyone's not seen any of the films, I do recommend watching them because they're very good.
I don't think I've ever listened to this soundtrack. I've seen I think I've only watched American Wedding once, but in terms of the American Pie films, I think came out when I was 14, so I never saw the first one at the cinema, but it was one of those things where you'd have people at school go, like saying they snuck in to go and watch it, and it's like, oh yeah, like he goes, oh, it's like, and basically teenage boys just going, ooh, like,
yeah,
like dick jokes and all that kind of thing. I see. We were very easily amused. That the teenage boy. And I remember having the VHS and watching it for the first time on VHS, because I had the VHS for Christmas, and that really dates that sentence. I had it on video, I think, and then I remember when American Pie 2 came out. That was 2001, I think. That was 2001. Yeah. When did it come out? August. So yeah, I was 16, and I remember me and friends of mine going to watch it at the cinema, and I think it's still the only American Pie film I've seen at the cinema. American Wedding, I didn't bother going to see. I wasn't too fussed about watching it, and I ended up, I think a friend of mine downloaded it from the internet in the days of like when they used to download the kind of like someone snuck a video camera and people would,
the
like,
pirated,
really the pirated stuff. And like I can remember watching it, and there's like, every so often there was someone who'd walk underneath. You'll see someone walk underneath the thing and stuff. And American Reunion, or the Reunion, I can't remember what the actual exact title is. I remember, I don't think I saw that in the cinema either. I think I saw that. I think I bought it on like a very cheap DVD deal. But the first one I remember watching when I was like 14, 15, and absolutely finding it the funniest thing ever.
It is great.
Yeah,
it is great.
Thing ever. American Pie 2, I can't remember. Don't remember much American Pie 2. And American Wedding, American Wedding, keep getting confused with the Reunion, because I think when you first mentioned this and you said it was from 2003, I thought you meant the Reunion film. And I was like, it's not that old. It can't be that old. It can't be that old. But then the American Reunion's 10 years old, which I still think.
Yeah, I was gonna say it has to be from 2012, because I went and saw that film when I was graduating high school. Because I remember and now it's kind of crazy because they were it was their 10-year reunion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, my 10-year reunion was this year. So I'm now like at the point of life that they were all in. So very strange.
Yeah. But yeah, I can remember that. The American Wedding, I think with a mixture of not having the time to watch it, I decided not to rewatch. I'm not decided not to rewatch it, but to focus on the actual songs themselves.
Yeah.
So a lot of the film, can't remember much of the film apart from that. I think there's quite a few high profile people not in it, in the whole kind of in the cast. Because I think, is it Chris Oz? No, not Chris. Chris. What's his name?
Chris Klein, the guy who plays Oz. Yeah,
Chris Oz. What I'm talking about, wasn't it? And I think Tara Reid wasn't in it either.
Yeah,
and I think more or less everyone else was. I think that was in the Mina Savari. I don't think she was in it. Wasn't in it. But the main kind of like the heavy hitters, like Jason Biggs and Sean William Scott, Alison Hannigan, Eddie K. Thomas, and Thomas E. Nichols. Yeah, and of course Eugene Levy, who I think has managed to kind of surpass the Jim's dad thing, considering he's been in pretty much almost all of them with Schitt's Creek. But I think a lot of people coming into that would have known him as Jim's dad, but
definitely.
I believe he was like kind of well known for being a sketch comedian before. Was he on Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, he got his start in the so Second City is a really famous improv group in Chicago that feeds pretty much directly into Saturday Night Live. So Tina Fey, a lot of the really famous people from SNL started there, but they have a Canadian version. And yeah, Eugene Levy and what's the other actress in Schitt's Creek?
Oh, Catherine O'Hara.
Catherine O'Hara, thank you. They met in Second City, Canada, like 40 years ago. So that's how they kind of started their partnership. But yeah, he's very funny.
Yeah, I think I can remember that, and I think almost and very kind of very topical. I think the character Stifler's mom by Jennifer Coolidge, who at the day of recording, I think won an Emmy yesterday.
Yeah,
I'm not sure for what TV program, but yeah, she just recently won an Emmy. But again, I kind of only know her as Stifler's mom. The soundtrack itself, as you said, it's like full of kind of, I think you described it as pop punk bangers, which quite a few of them I wasn't aware of. A few bands that I don't know how big they were in the US. I think some of them were only like barely got looking in the UK. Was this perhaps a very formative album in terms of your music taste, do you think?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Because obviously I've come on your podcast previously to speak about Panic at the Disco. And in that episode I've mentioned about 1,000 times that I'm a huge Fall Out Boy fan, or sort of was. I've kind of outgrown Fall Out Boy slightly. But so yeah, I would say that the music in this soundtrack, I'm sure, influenced that taste that I eventually had as more of a teenager. And I just think it's kind of a cool soundtrack because there's some really, really famous songs that most people would know. And then there's some more random deep cuts, but then there's also songs by really famous people that weren't from any of their like big records or anything. So it's like a very interesting mix of music that they have going.
Did any of the songs or bands on here kind of like spur you off into listening to them more? So did you become fans of bands because of of the soundtrack?
Yeah, I would say probably Good Charlotte, Sum 41, and All American Rejects, and American Hi-Fi as well. Actually, my dad and I were really big American Hi-Fi fans. But yeah, I would say I would say definitely Good Charlotte, Sum 41, and the All American Rejects. Like those are all, at least in America, I would say household names, or they were at that time. But I think this soundtrack was probably what introduced me to all of those bands. And they've all got quite a similar, like we said, like kind of pop punk sort of sound.
Yeah, I think the previous two films had kind of very similar, very kind of similar like kind of sound to them, to the pop punk stuff. For example, the first film, I always remember having the song "Muck" because of Blink-182, and I was a massive Blink-182 fan, and they even cameoed in the actual first film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the song they had was "Mutt" in there, and I never listened to. I think I only ever listened to the soundtrack once, because a couple of these songs, like, I can vaguely remember that's on the first one. The Goldfinger song, I can't remember, but I do know because Goldfinger, because it was on the Tony Hawk soundtrack. And I think the Third Eye Blind song, I think I know another song of theirs. I think it was Graduate, because it's on the Can't Hardly Wait soundtrack. Did you ever go back to did you ever listen to the previous film soundtracks at all? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think on Spotify, it's quite easy to find a playlist with like every song that was ever in the films. I always I don't know if you're a fan of the show Veronica Mars, but Veronica Mars has an absolutely banging soundtrack all the way through from the original show to like the film and kind of the reboot, and there are some people on Spotify who have quite literally gone through every single episode, because they released an official Veronica Mars soundtrack almost 20 years ago, but there are people that have gone through and actually made a playlist of every single song that plays for even a split second on the show. So I appreciate these people on Spotify that kind of do God's work for us and find all these songs. And yeah, that it's the same with with American Pie. So there are playlists that have every single song from all of the films. So yeah, I've definitely listened, and I agree. I think the second film might have some Blink 182 on it as well. I always thought I also was a big Blink fan when I was younger, so I always thought it was cool hearing them in those films.
Yeah, again, I'm not too familiar with the second soundtrack. I think I'm again listening to that once, but yeah, the soundtrack for that, Every Time I Look For You, opens it up with Blink 182 again, which is from Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, which is one of my favourite albums.
Yeah,
I think it used to be one of my favourite albums. I think as I've gotten older, I think I'm starting to love the self-titled more than Take Off Your Jacket. But Every Time I Look For You, I think it's part of the album which kind of signals kind of like the more mature thing they'll go to in the next album. But I love that song. And again, yeah, it's a mixed again with like the first one and this one, as we'll go into a bit later. A mix between like kind of more recognisable names and songs and like not hit singles, the more kind of deep cuts, like Green Day, Scumbag, which I'm not aware of. There's American Hi-Fi on the second one with the song called Vertigo. Uncle Cracker, I'm going to split this room in half, which Uncle Cracker I only know because of Follow Me.
Follow Me, yeah. Same.
Yeah, well, and interestingly as well, Sum 41 is on the American Pie 2 soundtrack with a small song called Fat Lip, which is one of my favourite pop punk songs of all time.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, the amount of times I've kind of danced to that in kind of indie / pop punk discos, it's I was going to say embarrassing, but no, I'm not going to.
No, there's nothing embarrassing about it.
I'm going to embrace it. There's quite an interesting kind of mix of different songs with the American Wedding soundtrack. There's like some really kind of big hit songs that are still relevant today. There's one in particular that has an added poignancy to it, particularly because of recent events. There's a couple of interesting covers on here as well. A couple of kind of like songs that will defend me in my life. A couple of songs from bands that I know that I never even heard the songs before. There's a very kind of interesting mix of songs, and I think the topics always come up about kind of the choice of songs to do. I mean, it opens quite with some like heavy hitters, but then they throw in the kind of more obscure stuff. And part of me is always wondering whether that's a case of if they had a budget or whether the kind of labels wouldn't allow them to do certain songs or not. Why do you think that might be? Have you ever thought of why they did that? Or
yeah, I think it might be. I say this because my dad has a really good friend who was in a band in about this time period as well, and he's got a song on the original Charlie's Angels film soundtrack.
okay.
and it's a song called Tangerine Speedo. His band was called Caviar, and it plays there's a scene in Charlie's Angels where like Bill Murray is just like walking into a room with a woman or whatever, and the song has a very kind of iconic hook, so you can tell it's the song, but it plays very quickly, and it does because I know I know someone in the band, and like I know they get paid for that, when that film is shown and stuff. I do think that maybe they use some of the more obscure songs so that they can pack more music into the film, because those more obscure songs, like to use a tiny little snippet of it is probably quite inexpensive, compared to obviously like Foo Fighters or something like that. So yeah, I think you're probably right. I think it's like, I'm sure it's a budget thing, but I think if they use more songs that aren't as massive, that just means that they can have all the more and also like, because it's in American Wedding, they weren't teenagers, but I think the ethos of the American Pie films is kind of, teenage angst and hormones and and all of that. I think it is a very music driven film. There's just going to be loads of songs playing in all different scenes throughout the film.
Yeah, and I think you perhaps got the kind of the heavy hitters just try and get people to get the album as well. So you need to have perhaps a couple more high profile stuff. And yeah, and I do quite front load this, I think, with quite a few big names. And I think we should just like get to it, because I think we should get to it, because there's quite a few songs to talk about. There's a couple I definitely want to talk about. And so where would you want to start?
So earlier I alluded to a song by someone very famous, but the song itself might not be very well known. So I think that's one I'm going to go for first. It also happens to be one of my favorites on there, but it's I Don't Give by Avril Lavigne. And this is a great song, great sort of Avril Lavigne 2003 breakup sort of vibes. But it is an unreleased Avril Lavigne song, so it wasn't on Let Go or any of her subsequent albums. I think it was recorded. It wasn't recorded for the purpose of this film. I think it was recorded as a B-side. But this soundtrack is the only place I've ever seen it. But if you're an Avril Lavigne fan, it is an absolute banger.
Yeah, from what I can read about it, it was on the enhanced CD version of Let Go, which is the debut album. But yeah, I remember listening to this. I was like, I couldn't remember, because I'm sure I've listened to Let Go at least once or twice, a bit more than that. But yeah, I couldn't remember it, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I would have heard it. It was an actual album track. But yeah, it's kind of very weird in that it sounds oddly like something should be singing today.
Totally.
But very, very like 17-year-old wrote this.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think it would have fit perfectly well on Let Go. I mean, I that was like my first favorite album ever. That was kind of when I developed music taste. So I love Let Go as it is. But yeah, not to go on too many side tangents, but I often prefer some of the B-sides for some of my favorite albums to some of the Stop the World, I Want to Get Off by Arctic Monkeys is like my favorite Arctic Monkeys song ever. And that was a AM B-side, I think. So I always find it really interesting to see like what didn't necessarily make the cut for the artist for an album for whatever reason, that when it's still actually just a really good song.
Yeah, I think some people I think it's probably just stuff they might have just recorded during the album sessions and like didn't make the album, and they just throw them in as the B-sides. But I think the concept of a B-side, I don't think exists anymore.
No.
And so because the album song, you just release a single, another single, which is immediately on streaming, and then it's part of the album that comes out later, and the kind of like extra cuts, I think they're only on like extended editions or bonus versions or re-releases and stuff. It's a bit of a shame actually, because I'm trying to think of, and I don't know why my mind always goes to it, but the first ever B-side I can seem to remember is, I think, off the Spice Girls Wannabe single, which I had, and I remember having the single of that, and I think it was Bumper to Bumper, I think, which I think was called, it was like a B-side, I think. It was either that or that it might have been the B-side to Say You Were There, I can't remember, but it is very kind of early 2000s in terms of the lyrics as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, and like, so I was listening to it driving to work this morning, and I was like, yeah, if you didn't know it was Avril Lavigne, you would have guessed it was
Yeah,
Avril Lavigne.
definitely.
But and it's very catchy as well. Quite very catchy. And again, it sounds very similar to stuff that she could still be putting out today, just with the Billie Eilish stuff. I mean, have you listened to her latest?
I don't think so, actually. I need to. I know Kelly Clarkson's also coming out with music, so I feel like all of these pop idols that I was obsessed with in my younger years are having a resurgence, and I need to get involved.
Yeah, I think the 20-year kind of cycle is now reaching the pop punk kind of
Yeah,
like side and stuff,
yeah,
and the majority of them seem to be produced by Travis Barker, because like most of Avril Lavigne's new album is produced by. I say it's new; it's quite a few years old. Not a few years, quite a few months old now, and it's produced by Travis Barker. So yeah, so the DNA of the Blink-182 is in that. But so where else do you want to go next in terms of the songs?
kind of. Well, to the next song actually on the list, "Laid" by Matt Nathanson. So, this is quite a famous song, but it's obviously a cover. I think "Laid" is by James, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I actually I don't know if this is like a hot take, but I actually quite prefer this version to the original. I don't know, it's just very punchy and I really enjoy it. And I like Matt Nathanson. He does, what does he do? Like Come On Get Higher. He's got a few like quite famous songs of his own. But yeah, it's a great song, although it's used in several of the American Pie films, like some sort of variation of Laid is used, and they usually use it as like the credits roll and stuff. And it's a very, trying to think of how to describe it. Like you can imagine like a high school slideshow being shown to it or something. It has an element of like, sentimentality to it. But
Yeah.
if you actually listen to the lyrics, it's filthy. It's a really, I mean, it's called Laid, so you can probably assume. But yeah, it's quite a filthy song. So it's funny that it has, I don't know, just to me, I've always kind of thought it sounds quite like sentimental and happy, but it's actually kind of raunchy in the same way that the films are.
Yeah, I think it's a serious raunchy. I think it's a very
Yeah.
introspective raunchy. I think considering that I think that they had much by Blink-182 in the first film. This is kind of like a mature like smut. Well, not really smutty. I think it's a kind of it's the introspective way of describing kind of like teenage lust, more or less.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a very I found it it's a very weird song to choose. I think it's just because of the title's Laid, and you can say,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this like this new wave of modern sex comedy is going to have the song called Laid as its like main
Yeah.
theme and stuff. I do think I always think that it's a lot more kind of interesting rather than perhaps like normal pop, like the pop punk songs that it's
Yeah.
alongside. Yeah, and I think I think it does also have, I think, a kind of like aspects of like lingering depression in its song lyrics, like when like a teenage crush or a kind of teenage romance has ended, or like a dalliance has like ended, there's kind of like a weird kind of depression afterwards, and I think it
Yeah.
kind of dips into that. I think as particularly as the song goes on, and like that last bit I think is really really good. Where it says, moves out of your house, so you move next door. That whole section I think is real.
Yeah, that's my favorite bit as well.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean, for years I didn't realize that the band James, it was their most famous song, and I think it still is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always known them for a song called "Sit Down," which I still much prefer. But yeah, but what's interesting as well is that as we was talking about the Avril Lavigne song, one of the three, which is the unofficial archive of the band James, has said this about this song. Originally viewed by the band as a throwaway song and a possible B-side, Brian Eno soon convinced them of the potential of this track. Whilst only reaching a disappointing 22 in the UK charts, it made serious inroads for the band in the US, where it led to performances on primetime TV shows such as Letterman, Conan O'Brien and Jay Leno. So I find that quite interesting that they thought of this as a B-side.
Yeah. You hear that though. You definitely hear that about, songs that almost got cut from records and then they end up being like the band's all-time biggest hit.
I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of any. But
I know.
why not? Yeah, or like songs that are massive, like insanely like massive or global kind of game changers, and it's usually something that they wrote whilst on the loo in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he goes, oh, it was only a joke song, and it's now our most famous song, and it bought my 3-story house. But no, I think the song Laid, I think I always found quite interesting. Yeah, so you say it gained more popularity because of the use in the American Pie films and the cover of Matt Nathanson exclusively. It was later included on the spin-off American Pie Presents Bandcamp after previously only being in the first 2 film trailers. In the 7th instalment of the franchise, The Book of Love contains a new cover of Laid by singer Aidan Hawken as of 2012. It had yet to be released on any album or single. The 8th film, American Reunion, features the original version by James played during the film for the first and only time in the series history. Yeah, so you got a long wait to hear the James version in the actual film. I'm not aware of Matt Nathanson. I mean, I don't know if he released or made a dent in the UK, but I've never really heard of him. Is he quite big in
he
the
must
US?
not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say big, but I'm just so Come On Get Higher is definitely his most famous one, and I think that came out in 2007. So yeah, I was like late junior high, early high school. I definitely remember that song being on like MySpace, so that makes sense. Yeah, he certainly wasn't massive in the US, but he was a name I would say people knew.
Yeah, I think I just a quick look at that. Come On Get Higher, and it didn't even chart in the UK. So I don't know whether it actually got released. But yeah, I didn't. But I think, from what I gather, I think like it's one of his well-known songs, and it's one of those cases where like one of his more well-known songs is a cover, which has to be slightly annoying, but then probably pays the bills, I guess.
I was going to say it pays the bills, and it happens to be a good cover, so that's good.
Yeah. I think I found a YouTube video of him performing it, I think a few years ago, and I think it was a really good version of it.
Yeah.
So, where do you want to move on to next?
I'm gonna keep it quite sentimental and go to Honey and the Moon. Mainly for lyrical reasons. I mean, this is just a really like lovely slow song. I think it plays during one of like the wedding scene. I mean, the film is called American Wedding, so I think you can infer that there is a wedding in the film. But the main reason is that I remember. I mean, like I said, I grew up listening to this album, so the soundtrack, I should say. So the lyrics of these songs were kind of burned into my brain, but back in kind of like the MySpace and Twitter early days, you thought I wasn't going to find a way to insert Fall Out Boy into this more than one time, and here I am. But yeah, I was hopelessly in love and obsessed with Pete Wentz, the very famous bassist from Fall Out Boy. And I remember he either tweeted or like posted it on his MySpace or something, but the opening lyric to the song, which is "Don't know why I'm still afraid. If you weren't real, I would make you up." And I just remember as an impressionable teenager just thinking that was a really nice line. But it's also just a really nice song as well. So yeah, definitely one of my favorites off the soundtrack.
Yeah, and it's quite an interesting kind of like way to end it as well. But I think it's when you think about the film, it is basically about a wedding, and then you have and like the kind of romantic kind of like ending of the wedding with the slow dance and the kind of like sentimental nature of it. I think it's like a good way to end the film as well. And yeah, those opening lyrics, I agree, are very very good, very good, kind of like nice and sweet, and they got genius annotation, and it's one of kind of like. And it's not outwardly weird, it's just very matter of fact. And I'll quote what the genius annotation for those 2 lines are of "Don't know why I'm still afraid. If you weren't real, I would make you up now." The narrator is unsure to why he is so reluctant to pursue a relationship with his significant other. From that, he tells us that even if the love interests were not real, he'd form an exact replica of him/her in his mind, which is why he is confused about his fearful emotions. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, which is I don't know. I think that's kind of just weirdly just flat out restating the line. I think, but I just find it quite funny that people are like you kind of trying to interpret or trying to decipher lyrics, and then you're just reiterating what they're saying. But no, I completely agree. It's a very kind of lovely song. But again, I'm not familiar with Joseph Arthur either. I don't know who.
No, I was just giving him a bit of a Google, and the most like interesting thing I found was that he was discovered by Peter Gabriel, who's obviously um, quite a musical legend. But yeah, I couldn't tell you any other music by Joseph Arthur. My adoration for this soundtrack never led me to check out any of his other stuff, so maybe that'll be my next point of call.
But yeah, he's known for his solo material and is a member of Fistful of Mercy and RNDM, which I'm not familiar with those. But
No, me neither.
alternative rock and folk rock artists, but no, I'm not familiar. But initially, when I first read it, I mistook him for James Arthur. I'm pretty sure James Arthur wasn't around in the early noughties. But where do you want to move on to next?
I think we'll take a bit of a break from the sentimentality and go to Bouncing Off the Walls by Sugar Cult, because that is just a very, very fun track. Um, and yeah, it's super upbeat, very pop punk. And it was my best friend Zoe and I'm pretty sure we made like a music video to this song when we were kids. We absolutely, which I'm sure could be dug up and used to blackmail me on YouTube in some capacity. So
if anyone listening has any idea.
So yeah, no, it's just a great, yeah, pop punk banger, I think is how I would describe it. It's a great song.
I wasn't aware of this one. I don't think I heard this one before, or I don't think I've heard of Sugar Cult. But I say I really quite like this one. I think it's got that kind of pop punk kind of sound that I perhaps was listening to if it was just a couple of years earlier.
Yeah.
Because I think I was 17 or 18 by the time the soundtrack was coming out. So I think I was on the verge of discovering. I may have listened to The Killers, and then my kind of taste went a lot more indie at this point. But Length of the Walls, I think he's got a very kind of like very nice kind of catchy, soft like pop punk sound to it. And I was like, I remember like driving up the motorway and it came, and I was like, I really quite like this.
Yeah.
Interesting to say that one of the things that's on the Wikipedia page is that it was played in the background of the series premiere of the television show 24, which
I was never a big 24 fan, but I'm familiar with 24, and I find it kind of difficult to picture this song in that show.
the only way that I'm trying to say was a massive 24 fan, and I think I've seen that first series more out of I've rewatched that first series quite a few times, and I think the only way I can think of in the first episode, I think it's his daughter, played by Elisha Cuthbert. I think she's listening to the radio. Like radio, I think she's listening to the radio at midnight, and he's there going, "Go to bed, it's midnight." And yeah, I think that's the only way I could think of, because I really can't see Jack Bauer blasting Sugar Cult.
No,
was on the way
I
to
can't either.
But yeah, I mean, and Sugar Cult, I think I'm not aware of who Sugar Cult are.
No, I thought maybe I knew more of their music, but I just looked and I don't. So I think this was a bit of a one-hit wonder for them. And I also I don't know, because of how much I was sort of raised on this soundtrack, I don't know if other people my age who weren't so into the American Wedding soundtrack actually knew this song either. So I'm not actually sure how popular in the wide stream it was.
I think they supported Green Day, from what I can gather, in the American Idiot tour, and I think in 2004 they supported Blink-182, and so that would have been on the self-titled tour. So
yeah.
they were kind of around, so they kind of had support and backing from the biggies. So and particularly in some of their imperial phases as well.
I also noted it was in Van Wilder, which is a film that I have seen, but not enough to remember the soundtrack very well. So I don't remember it in the film. But Van Wilder's with Ryan Reynolds and Tara Reid, and Tara Reid is obviously one of the main kind of girls in the American Pie film. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so I wasn't aware of Sugar Cult, and but I did really quite enjoy that one. So where do you want to move on to next?
Next, you know what? I think I'm gonna go for the obvious and pick the first track, Times Like These by Foo Fighters. And I have to say, I'm definitely I like Foo Fighters. Not as much as other people seem to. People, it's kind of like Coldplay, where they have like a psychotic fan base. I really like Dave Grohl. I was sad about Taylor Hawkins, but I'm just not like a psychotic fan. But anyway, always liked this song. And then I think the COVID cover that all of those celebrities did really ruined it for like I still like the
Yeah.
song, but when I was listening to this soundtrack when I was making dinner tonight in prep for this episode, and yeah, I still like this song, but it just makes me think of all of those celebrities and that god awful song that they did at the start of COVID, and it just reminds me of like baking banana bread and being afraid to leave the house. So
I wasn't aware that someone did a COVID cover, and I'm so glad you warned me. So I'm not going to look at that. But I think very similar. I've brought this up in the past, and one of my kind of like the pick a disc lexicons that I kind of created, which I've not actually used that often, is when I refer to musicians as a Grohl after Dave Grohl. In fact, where it's a case of I like the person, I'm not a fan of the music. Foo Fighters for me are very much a singles band. Every time I've tried to dip into the albums, I just can't get past the
yeah.
singles. They've got some really good singles, but I can't listen to a full album, and I don't want to say it bores me. It doesn't. I think after a while, I can kind of listen to something else. Whereas like greatest hit, if I listen to greatest hits album, I'll probably be okay because it's all the kind of
Yeah.
singles and stuff that have kind of embedded themselves. So stuff like Learn to Fly, Best of You, Times Like These, Breakout, Monkey Wrench, all songs that the singles that I know of and really quite like. But
Yeah.
if I try and venture into the album stuff, I just can't do it. And Dave Grohl always makes me feel guilty for not liking the album tracks, because he just comes across as being very, very nice. And I don't like. I really don't like that.
No,
I don't like him being nice.
Yeah, no, and they're yeah, I completely agree. Um Whereas like what's interesting is like I mentioned Coldplay. I really am not a Coldplay fan. I just really not. I don't like Chris
Hmm.
Martin, but I'm probably the opposite with Coldplay in that there's some of the more deep cut Coldplay songs that I've come across over the years that I actually quite like, but it's some of their bigger singles that just grate on me. There are some of their singles that, famous songs that I really like. But yeah, with Foo Fighters, I completely agree with you, but even to the extent that I don't think I've ever actually tried to go listen to their albums. Like I think I've always just if Foo Fighters come on the radio, I won't turn it off. I like their songs, but yeah, I've never even made the effort to venture past the singles with them. But yeah,
Yeah,
Times Like These is a great song, and I cannot believe that you avoided that god awful celebrity mashup. It
I don't
was
know. I think I just kind of I watched the Imagine one and just. Ugh. But yeah, I think as alluded to earlier, I think there's an added poignancy to times like these. Because I think recently they had the Taylor Hawkins tribute concert, which I was dipping in and out of watching, and there's a video that's going along where kind of like they're singing a very slow version of the start of times like these,
mhm.
and it is quite a moving and kind of emotional moment where like Dave Grohl kind of breaks down in the middle of singing it, and the
Mhm.
crowd are singing him on, and it is and like kind of like the emotional kind of the emotion and kind of like the kind of impact of the fact that kind of like celebrating and kind of like a tribute to Taylor Hawkins, and he kind of breaks down during it,
Definitely.
and it is very, very moving, and I think it adds a whole new layer to the song, times like these, and kind of like it's one of their kind of more kind of like introspective kind of like, if I say kind of like again, I'm gonna punch myself. Yeah, it's one of their songs that I think will have, if he continues with Foo Fighters, or perhaps ventures off into perhaps going into like another musical kind of project, which is probably just Foo Fighters in all but name without Taylor Hawkins, I can probably see them kind of singing this as perhaps like as a kind of tribute every time he performs this now.
Definitely.
There's that, because of that moment in the tribute concert, adding that extra layer stuff, which retrospectively makes it a very weird choice to open up an album about a very raunchy sex comedy.
I know.
But
no, I think that, I think it's, I can't really think of a song that like my association of it has changed so much than times like these. Cause like I said, I did associate it with the American Pie soundtrack, although it was definitely famous separate from that as well. But yeah, the COVID like Spotify Lounge song, and then the performance you were just speaking about, dedicated to Taylor Hawkins, kind of brought the mood down on the song quite a bit, but it's still a good one.
I say there's quite a few that I know I want to bring up. Is there any you definitely still want to talk about before we go to?
No, I think I covered my must hits. So
okay,
fire away.
Yeah, so the one I want to talk about is the Anthem by Good Charlotte.
Excellent.
Yeah, that came on my drive to work up the motorway, and I mean, I only know the one album from Good Charlotte, which is The Young and the Hopeless. Is it The Young and the Hopeless? Young and the Restless? I can't remember.
Or is it Young and the Reckless?
Reckless, I think. It's the song. It's the album that anyone.
No, you were right. The Young and the Hopeless.
Okay. Yeah. I mean that if that's going to be a Matt pick at some point in the future, probably, if no one else beats me to it. Yeah, because this is kind of like the first song. Well, it's the second song off the album after the intro. But you know what? I really like this song. There's nothing I can't dislike about it. It's catchy. It hits quite a lot of pop punk tropes, but I don't know. It's so good to just sing along to, and particularly in the morning when you're waking up about to go to work. I'll defend that Good Charlotte album and this song. So I don't know about yourself. Was you much of a Good Charlotte fan, or?
I definitely, absolutely. I loved Good Charlotte, and same. Probably more so this album than anything else, but I have so many memories of listening to this song, and it had to have been used in countless. Like I want to say it was used in Malcolm in the Middle, if I'm not mistaken. Like there must be loads of shows and films over the course of the early noughties that would have used this song. So completely agree.
Yeah, I think the word anthem, particularly in the pop punk scene as well, is just used all the time. There's 2 songs from Blink-182 called Anthem. But yeah, I don't know. There's just something about this. It's like a rallying roll call, which at 17 years of age, you're thinking, man, this is deep. It really isn't. But yeah, I think, and looking back now, it's kind of comical almost, the kind of like over dramatic stuff. Like at my high school felt more to me like a jail cell, a penitentiary. My time spent there, it only made me see that I don't want to be like you. I don't want to do the things you do. It's that kind of like, at the time, you're thinking it's really kind of like, it speaks to me. And but then when you're looking back on it, it's like, oh, it's really cheesy, but you still sing along to it. And yeah, and then it kicks in with that chorus, and I love that chorus. I don't ever want to be you, which again, so many pop punk tropes. I can't remember why I didn't. I think I was at another gig or I was out with friends, but a couple of friends of mine had a spare ticket to go and watch them when I was in Birmingham a few years ago, and I couldn't go, and and part of me really wanted to. I asked them, oh, was it like, what were they singing and stuff? And he goes, and there's like, mate, they pretty much played the whole of the first album and then just a few of the other songs. It was mainly the first album, and I was like, oh, God damn it.
Yeah, that would be great. I also like my favorite Good Charlotte, fun fact is the fact that because of Joel and Benji, Madden, Cameron Diaz and Nicole Richie are sisters-in-law, which is just like, on the one hand, I can't really picture them as being sisters-in-law, but on the other hand, they were both kind of icons of that time period in their own right. So it's very funny to me that they're family.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize he was married to. Oh, so Joel is married to Nicole Richie, and
Yeah.
Benji is married to Karen Diaz. Okay, I
Yeah.
did not know that. I thought one of them didn't one of them used to date Hilary Duff, or am I getting confused with someone else?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I think you're correct, but I can't. And I never knew the difference between Joel and Benji either.
Joel's the one that sang. I think Benji was the kind of one with the piercings, and
Mm.
I think let me fact check that. Yes, Joel is the lead singer, whereas yeah, Benji was the one who used to have all the kind of spikes. Like
Yeah.
he just I remember seeing him thinking it was actually Joel in like makeup when I first watched the I think Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous video. But
That
yeah,
is also
I will always
a great
I will
song.
defend that first Good Charlotte album. Yeah, people might mock at me for it, but you know what? They're wrong.
Completely.
Yeah, next one I want to go to as well is I'm only going to briefly touch about it because I think the song's actually really really bad, comically bad. And I never heard it before. And when it first came on, it was like, man, this is making the biscuit sound good. Which is the Fever for the Flavour,
Yeah.
which famously apparently was listed at number 6 in the worst 50 songs of the 2000s by The Village Voice. Which anyone who's not listened to it, yeah, give it a listen. It hasn't dated well. It's
No.
just yeah. It's
No, that was gonna be my like one to leave off. But like I don't know, it's kind of a funny one to leave off because it is a funny song, and it also I think is so quintessentially American Pie
Yeah.
that I definitely think it's a good one to speak about. But I actually think when I was, when this film first came out and my family first started listening to this soundtrack, that I think my mom used to skip over this song because, again, it is filthy. And it's not filthy like Laid is filthy, where it's like once you are old enough to understand the lyrics, you're like, oh, that song's very sexual. It is just blatantly filthy.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and it's just kind of a crap song. So yeah, I do definitely remember my mom just skipping whenever that one came on.
I mean, like the pre-chorus alone is I really don't want to actually read it out in polite company, but yeah, Fever Flavor of the whatever. Did I mention? Pay attention. Gonna take that booty to the nudie dimension. Which I mean, give him credit. The actual flow and the kind of like the rhyming thing actually kind of works, and but he's kind of really kind of bad to the point. And there's even worse stuff that comes up in like later choruses. But yeah, I just remember hearing this. He first started playing, I was like, okay, this is kind of like this. When you first hear it, when the music starts playing, it's kind of like a very kind of weird, kind of almost pop punk take on the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
But then the lyric starts, and you're thinking, okay, yeah, this definitely wouldn't have passed a lot more today anyway. But yeah, I just had to bring that one up.
No, I think it's a good one to bring up because I also think that if you were to pick a song that represents Stifler from the films, like I think that's definitely it. And he's such a standout character.
Yeah, I think as much as we probably kind of like saying how much we dislike it, it is very emblematic of kind of the kind of sound that the American Pie films, or the kind of sometimes the low level kind of humor it went for.
Yeah.
And I think it matches it kind of perfectly. There's I think 2 more that I think I want to kind of bring up. I'm going to say so I want to bring up Swing Swing by the All American Rejects.
Yeah.
A song. All American Rejects, a band that I don't really know much in terms of the albums. I only know about 3 or 4 of their singles, and I've always liked them. I don't know what any of the albums sound like, but the singles that I know, I'll defend. But I absolutely love Swing Swing.
Yeah.
There's just so much about it I love. I remember it used to be on Radio 1 all the time around 2002, 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much during like when I was in year 12, like year 12 up to when I went to my final year of sixth form, which I think is the equivalent of senior year. So it was one of those songs that kind of like settled in there, and there's just so much stuff I love about it. I kind of love the kind of weird synth, kind of like attempt at being an orchestral kind of synth start.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guitars that kick in, the catchiness of the chorus, it's an earworm for the earworms would have in their ears. That's how much it is. And also, Tom Welling from Smallville will lose a Tom Welling lookalike competition to Tyson Ritter.
Yep.
Yeah. So, so you mentioned you was a fan of All American Rejects. I'm assuming you quite like this one, or?
Yeah, I absolutely love this song. And I do think this song was like All American Rejects were really popular, particularly when I was in junior high. So when I was like 11 years old till like 13. But I think this song was how I discovered them. But yeah, Dirty Little Secret by All American Rejects. That's another banger. Yeah, I can't fault this song in any way. It's so good from start to finish.
Yeah, and it's just the thing. It's just the way it kind of builds up. I mean, I think it's like kind of like folk or usual kind of like normal, like kind of built in as a pop song, and very like people say it's like formulaic. But you know what? Some people can be wrong again. But no, I love the pre-chorus where that kind of like almost swing in motion of his lyrics. Whereas did you think? And he kind of builds up, and then builds up that kind of almost raising attention throughout the pre-chorus that kind of erupts into the actual chorus where he's on about the kind of like swinging from tangles, like hot crystal form of love, and again the genius annotation again being so insightful for the first two the swing lines, a recognition that of the past relationships meaning to him and how she seems to be lingering on the tangles of his heart. I mean, come on, genius. You can be a lot better. Can you help me to find a way to carry on again? You click on that, and the genius annotation. He's asking a different person to help him move on.
Oh, dear Lord.
Oh, man. I think genius could do with perhaps a bit of editorial things at times. But no, again, perhaps lyrically, it's not as deep as potentially Lay can be with some of its imagery. But I don't know. I will defend this song, and I still actually have on my computer the exact same MP3 that I downloaded from Gazar about 19 years ago. I still have the MP3 that I downloaded from it. It took me about 20 minutes to download.
That.
The final song that I kind of want to just bring up, it's not one that perhaps is very well known, but one that I ended up quite liking is Any Other Girl by New.
Yes.
Which basically I absolutely loved it. It's my favourite thing on the album.
It's a great song. It was probably me and my sister's favorite song off the album when we were kids. Just very energetic, good kind of girl song. No, I completely agree. It's a great tune.
I mean, they're the only band on the soundtrack that haven't got a Wikipedia page, and very short-lived, and there's hardly anything online about them. And it's slightly annoying because all I can figure out is that they were Danish and they released one album, and the album's not on Spotify. But the kind of music that it was, so I don't think I've made reference to this in the past, where but I don't think I've had a chance to talk about it in depth yet on a Map Pick. But I was throughout like my early to mid 20s, I ended up getting really, really into kind of Scandinavian indie synth music. So bands like The Sounds, Briskeby, I think Cresip are Dutch, Melody Club, all these kind of like Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian bands, I got obsessed with, and I just love that kind of sound. And yeah, this again, I think being Danish, so like in the Scandinavian category, we're like, oh man, this is brilliant. I've been trying to find the album on Amazon because at the moment it's something like 20 quid to try and import it. So I'm trying to find a cheap used copy, but I really enjoyed this. Nothing too complex, but I think because just the kind of cool, very laid back kind of indie nature of it. Chorus is very catchy. Just the kind of general kind of European sound that has that kind of like synth effects on the guitars. It's 22-year-old Matt would have been obsessed with this. So yeah, I've been trying to find the album, kind of a cheap copy of the album, because I think I loved it.
No,
So
I loved it as well. And I think that even though it's very obscure and you're struggling to even track down their album, I could have seen this song on so many other film soundtracks from that time. Like I think Legally Blonde, this song could have easily fit into that soundtrack. There's so many films from that time period where I think this song would have slapped. So even though it's a bit obscure, I think the sound is actually pretty universally good.
yeah, and good thing that the album's not on Spotify. I think the album itself is called Alpha Bravo Shock Pop Disco, all in one word. So it's Alpha Bravo Shock Pop Disco, all in
I
one
love
word.
that.
Not on Discogs. I think there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple that's on Amazon, but again, it's something like £5 delivery and about 13 quid. Hang on.
I almost want to throw the song on TikTok and like Kate Bush it and have it just like completely blow up with Gen Z, and then they'll have to release their album on Spotify.
Yeah. Hang on. Oh yeah, £2.99 with £1.99 shipping from Rhythm Station. Ooh, I'm really tempted to get that. Really tempted. Yeah, I'm really tempted to look into that. That's how much I really like that song. Yeah, that's tapped into a kind of dormant part of my music taste that I sometimes neglect. So yeah, thank you for that. I really really like that song.
I'm pleased. Good.
Yeah,
I'm
if I
glad
do
you
find
found something.
if I do find that album, I'll let you know.
Yeah, please do.
But yeah, so so we talked quite about a few of the songs there as well, and again, mainly because of it being a compilation, rather than a actual kind of album song. It's a bit different to usual episodes where I can't really ask you if you've seen the film. Well, can't see if you've seen all the bands play these songs live at once, because it wouldn't have happened. But I mean, from this, have you actually seen any of the bands on this live?
You know what? I don't think that I have. Yeah, because between Good Charlotte, Sum 41, All American Rejects, and Avril Lavigne, those would have been the bands that I would be most likely to go see in person, and I haven't. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, same. I think I still perhaps I would still jump at the chance to watch Good Charlotte if Mouse the Set was gonna be the first album. I would
Yeah.
jump at that. Same. Yeah. All American Rejects, part of me would like to, but I don't know. Are they still together? I'm
Not
sure.
actually sure.
But again, they'd have to just play 4 songs. Yeah, they are. They're still active.
I'd love to know what they actually look like now.
Exactly the same, although I think Tyson Ritter has just got a bit more facial hair.
Oh yeah, I can see that now.
He's actually married to Alina Satine, who was in Revenge and Cowboy Bebop.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. I'm learning so much about who's married to who in this episode. But no, I do remember that kind of like there's a kind of ongoing joke throughout Smallville that he looks very similar to Tom Welling. Back in those days, and yeah, so but in terms of the performance, there's not much in terms of like sales and of the actual soundtrack itself. All I can get from Wikipedia is that it landed at number 23 in the Billboard 200 chart. So wasn't a very very high stuff selling one, but still did relatively well. The actual film itself grossed about $232.7 million at the domestic box office, with a budget of $55 million. So it did quite well, but it was always going to, I think. Yeah, so I think that's more or less the end of the conversation when it comes to the American Winner soundtrack. The only thing left is the very important question, which is the song for the Spotify playlist. So if anyone's not listened to this before, what this is I'm going to ask Meg to pick one song from this album to be immortalised forever in the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. I can't veto it, so whatever Meg says goes. So Meg, which song are you going to be immortalised forever?
Can you imagine if I chose Fear for the Flame?
I mean, if you do choose it, if you do want to choose it, I'm not going to stop you. But
No, I absolutely will not choose that song, as funny as it would be. You know what? I was kind of struggling to decide, but since Any Other Girl delighted you so much and I love it, I actually think I'll choose that one. And then
awesome.
more people who listen to your playlist will come across it. I think that would be a nice thing.
Oh yeah, no, it's amazing. I think it's particularly as well because it's the only band that's in red. So there's no Wikipedia article, and yeah, I think like me from 15 years ago would have loved that song. So Any Other Girl joins the Spotify playlist Hall of Fame. So it follows "Keep It Between the Lines" by Sturgill Simpson, which the episode actually that was released on the day of recording, actually. And Happy Apollo by Sigur Rós, and before that, Josie and the Pussycats. So it's interesting, again, as always, there's an interesting kind of lead up to that, particularly as we lead to the 100th episode, so which is only a few episodes' time. So we've now reached the end of our conversation, Meg. Again, thank you ever so much for coming back on. You're always welcome. So
thank you so much for having me. It was a blast as always.
Yeah, and then a nice excuse to kind of revisit.
Exactly.
So if people can find you online, where can they find you?
So I used to have a podcast of my own that I have more or less retired. It's how Matt and I came across each other, but I still have the Instagram. It's still kicking it. So that's at Gin and Barrett Show. You can check out old episodes of the podcast if you like, and you can also just DM me if you'd like. That's where I am.
Yeah. So I think so. Gin and Barrett's still online to be still the archives on there. Yeah.
It is.
Do give it a listen. I'm on there talking about songs about drinking and my quest for a cider in Japan, which Meg, thank you ever so much for coming on again and to bring in some kind of 2003 pop punk into my life.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Do you like pop culture and top 10 lists? If you do, then step inside the Den of 10. In the Den, we have countless top 10 lists to captivate and titillate even the weariest soul. We've got lists of films.
And there's that famous thing about the scene where he improvised his way through smashing his hand and cutting his hand open on the glass as he banged his hand on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really say boo to that.
Music.
The rest of the song is like just a swirling crescendo of clever songwriting, amazing singing, great drumming, like beautiful guitar effects.
Video games.
And I think that's exactly what happened with Zelda. It was everything, looking back, is on a much lower resolution to what we see in Breath of the Wild. But as I was playing it, I just felt like my imagination was just going absolutely wild.
TV. You know, this is where a sitcom verges on the cinematic, still in a neat 20 minutes. And the interaction between these vastly different characters is so well realised. And more. Listen to us on all major podcast providers. Find us on Twitter @10of10pod, where you can like, follow, comment, and vote. Or find us on the We Made This podcast network at wemadethisnetwork.com. We hope to see you soon in the Den of 10.